Are you helping the people in merchandising get better if you're in marketing? Are you helping the e-commerce team that you work with get better when you're in marketing? If you're not doing that, you're not helping the organization and you're not a leader. You're a manager. And I think there's a big difference because management is about engaging with the people that report to you. Leadership is about having growth influence across the entire ecosystem of the people you engage with.
Daz, well, let's dive back in. So I want to talk about immersive experiences, and your mantra of creating immersive experiences is so intriguing. How did you implement this approach? First, tell us about your approach and your mantra around immersive experiences, and specifically how you applied this to your work with the X Games.
Yeah, so I think the fundamental thing to remember is that we as humans care much more about the shit that happens to us than the stuff we hear about, watch, or read. So creating connected ecosystems of storytelling should be rich in experience to create those powerful brand connections, which then leads to brand value, customer value, and so forth. One of the ways we thought about this when we were working with ESPN and X Games, which, remembering X Games is this incredible sport where, guys and women do amazing feats. One of the things that we thought about was most of the value is actually in the viewing, and the metrics for the company and performance was essentially eyeballs on the broadcast, not necessarily attendees. Now, attendees create a lot of environment and a lot of atmosphere, but the money's in the advertising revenue. So our opportunity when we thought about it was, how do we actually make that one connected world of experience? And we created the first ever, what we called companion app to a live sport broadcast. And so the app we created for X Games was designed primarily for people to use while they're watching the X Games at home, but give them the sense that they were participating and create a connection for them. So one of the things we did, which, in the end, X Games patented the technology for, was to create a way for the fans at home to create the hype at home to be measured like it was. So we created what was called the hype meter. And you could literally shake your phone as if you were clapping, or you could tap on a button. And that data was being fed back into the system to create a hype meter result on the event that was tracked and measured, but also it could be broadcast at the event. So it could take the fans at home to the event at the same time as the broadcast was happening. Fans at home were engaging with it. And you could look back and see over time, if someone did something incredibly amazing, the hype would go through the roof, and then it would obviously drop down between events and things. But it created that interaction. And what it did is it really, really multiplied the amount of viewing time, and the amount of viewing time led to significantly more reach, which drove revenue for X Games. And that was just one of the dimensions of the app, but it was built on the idea of creating a connected ecosystem with the viewers to the platform, to the TV broadcast, to the athletes and so forth. So that was one of the ways we thought about it.
Incredible. And what are some of the key elements that brands focus on when it comes to creating powerful, connected ecosystems of storytelling that you drew out from that experience and have applied across many other experiences?
Yeah, I think the first thing you need to do is think about the core principles of the relationship between experience and storytelling. I like to explain this in a sort of a fun but structured way. And if you think about marketing, the first way you try and differentiate is often by price. And price differentiation is super, super hard because it's usually a race to the bottom. Because if you go a little cheaper to beat your competition and so forth. So the way I think about that is with this little guy, the blue bear, which fundamentally, cute little blue bear, the sort of bear that you pick up when you're walking through the gift shop at a hospital to go and visit somebody. Is it flowers or is it the bear? And is the bear pink or is it blue? And these days it's probably white's probably a choice as well. This is based on price because it has no connection to anything except your need right there and the distribution of where it is. So if it's a $50 bear, maybe not. $20 bear, maybe. Depends on your relationship with the person you're visiting. That's really price differentiation. But then if you think about different ways of doing that, you get to someone like my friend, the Cabbage Patch Doll, which back in her day, the Cabbage Patch Doll was literally, the hardest thing to buy. Mums were doing deals out of the trunks of their car in parking lots with Cabbage Patch dolls. They were so popular. And the reason they were popular is because they all came with a story. And that story was adoption. You got an adoption certificate. And so the story of each Cabbage Patch doll was the fact that you adopted it and it became part of your family. So that's what I think about as story-based differentiation, because at the end of the day, it does the same thing as this, which is nothing. It doesn't do anything. It's just a doll. Glad this little girl's probably worth quite a bit of money now because they're very hard to get. But it's a good representation of what I always think is story-based differentiation. They created a story around each doll and made it the biggest thing ever. There are other ways of thinking about which is purely experience differentiation. And that's where the brown bear comes in. And the brown bear comes in because he's a Build-A-Bear bear. And if you've ever been to Build-A-Bear, it is an experience. You go through the process of building your bear, even down to the sort of little moments that they have, which sometimes this scares people because I do some little open heart surgery. You get their heart and you give it a kiss before you put it inside the bear. And so there's this whole connection of that experience of creating the bear. So again, Blue Bear, which is based solely on price, what I would say, like Brown Bear, fluff and stuffing, except for one key thing, the experience of creating this bear. So you have an emotional connection to that. But what happens if you go for, the killer app version of that, which is you put story and experience together? And that's when you end up with, got to make sure she's dressed appropriately, someone like Sage, being the American Girl doll. And we all know how big American Girl doll got in the early 2000s. And this was a doll of the year, so she is worth some pennies. One day if I retire, I might need to sell her. Essentially, the connection here is that there's two dimensions. One is the experience, like the tea parties that they created. And I had friends who took their children to New York to do a tea party at American Girl doll, and it's the amount of money they spent was insane. But it was that whole connection. But there's one bigger than that, which was being able to create your likeness. So literally creating you as a doll. So if you think about the psychology of participation, that is as strong as you can get. And it was quite genius to build that construct inside the model, because literally now that brand is a part of you and you are a part of the brand, which is truly the ultimate of a story connecting with an experience. You create it, you choose what you want, you can get the ears pierced and so forth. And most of my friends' daughters have their doll and then they have other dolls because they want to have friends. So they get people like Sage, who's really, really cool. But at the same time, they all come with a book. So this is Sage's book. And so it's the story of Sage. So they bring together a story of history and culture and service combined with a doll, combined with experience. And all of a sudden you've got a doll again, which does one thing I like, which is what everyone hopes of children, is that if you lie them down, their eyes close and they go to sleep. I don't think that works all the time.
How does that work? Let me know.
So it works for Sage. But other than that, she doesn't do a lot different than this guy, but she's so different and worth so much more money just to buy at retail. Like we're talking $10, we're talking $150 because of the story and the experience. And you can't replicate it. When I think about creating those immersive worlds, it really is thinking about those core characteristics and thinking about how you're building your brand in that environment with those dimensions of both the experience and the story. Too many people fall into the trap of thinking that their website's an experience. Yeah, it is, but it's likely the same as everyone else's. Everyone's using the same platforms. Everyone's using the same structures. And again, we have that principle of best practice of how to build a great digital experience. And the best practice is really the average of what everyone else is doing. It's nothing better. That's the way I think about it, is literally being able to think about how do you build a world where story and experience come together. And at the center of that is the customer. The customer's not on the outside of the world. They're on the inside of the world. And the world revolves around them.
It's incredible. It's insightful too, as well as the story of the brand, the story of the customer, and where do they intersect, making sure that the brand is facilitating that intersection. but that ultimately, to your point, that intersection then lives on and becomes a whole moment that you take home with you, that then this little girl, has a life of its own, essentially.
Yep.
That's all facilitated by that brand. So,
yep. And then you
it's
share that
powerful.
story because it's yours. And that's the thing.
Absolutely.
We like to share our stories more than anything else. And the American culture, to me, is, probably one of the great cultures in that storytelling about myself. No one in this country is frightened of telling everyone their story.
Yeah. Well, everybody likes to be part of sharing their own story and their experience, as they should. So
this episode of Listen Loudly is brought to you by Door Number 3, a growth marketing firm for challenger brands. Door Number 3 works with scale up and enterprise level brands who have a mandate to grow. We help them shift from accidental to intentional growth through performance media and brand development. If you need a growth strategy and execution partner, visit dn3austin.com or give us a call. We look forward to talking to you.
Looking back at your role as CMO of Neiman Marcus, it was at a time in the company's history where it led to really the highest sales and EBITDA for the company. And I'd love to know, as you look back at that historical moment more so, what are some of the takeaways? What are some of the strategies that you saw that directly impacted those incredible results in that moment in the company's history?
For me, it was a special time in my career, and I've probably had a few of those periods in my career where you feel like you make a real impact and achieve some results that were not necessarily expected. And I'll say that during that period, luxury products did have a resurgence post the pandemic. The market did improve, retail went up, all of those sorts of things did. But we had the extra challenge of having come through bankruptcy, restructuring financially as a brand. We closed a number of stores. We had to really actually start rebuilding the brand again, because with bankruptcy, you get a lot of headlines. None of them are good. We were starting behind the starting line compared to everyone else. I would love to wish that marketing was the primary driving force, but it never is, because, there's so many dimensions of any organization, especially a $3 to $4 billion company, that impact on performance. But what I'd like to say is, from our perspective, is we had a really, really good grip on what we needed to do to achieve our goals. So we had really very specific targets. Those targets were based on our customers. I knew specifically how many new customers I needed to bring to the company, and that created great focus. And it enabled us to literally say, okay, this is what we have to go and do. Where are we going to get those customers? What's it going to cost? What's the return on investment? And it opened up focus for us. And then in addition to that, across the organization, we had a very much a customer focus. Whether you were driving results with our loyal customers or bringing in new customers or trying to retain the sort of mid to new customers, we all understood what was trying to be achieved and had strategies in place to deliver on that. So I think that's the first part. The second part was a big shift to digital marketing, really focused targeting, and then thinking about those two things, building that with relevant storytelling and integrating our stories across all platforms. Neiman Marcus was traditionally a very heavy retail and catalog business and used to focus on sending out a lot of catalogs, and there was a lot of ROI on it, and the measurements to me were a little bit murky, the way they were attributing sales to those productions. But through the pandemic, we were forced to change and we had to go digital. So when we went digital, the strategy was to create relevant storytelling to make sure the brand was relevant to our specific groups. And to bring in new customers, we had to go and get younger customers, people entering the luxury space. Whilst Neiman Marcus is, a 100-plus-year-old brand, we've got grandchildren of customers and those sorts of things. But culturally, we don't want to be seen necessarily to be doing what our grandma did. We value fashion and we wanted to create connection to people. So we had to balance that history and legacy with a freshness and a relevance. At the same time, leverage the dynamic of the fashion industry, which is regeneration, freshness, and so forth. So we did that by becoming what I would say is a micro content marketing company, where we created lots of different content but used it across all channels, from social through to site, and distributed through email, etc. And that created an integrated world. And then integrating the store experience and merchandising in store, and then taking a few risks, trying a few different things with campaigns. And one of the great campaigns I was really proud of was probably the riskiest one. And I always, had the team push the boundaries when we came up with the summer camp concept. And we did both an incredible fashion shoot of models and fashion in a summer camp. So there's a great juxtaposition of, the traditional summer camp being on the rowboat on the lake or sitting by the fireplace, all those things with high-end fashion. And it came across both beautiful but thought-provoking and truly relevant because, we were connecting with an audience that wanted to see things differently. And then as an activation, we literally created the Neiman Marcus summer camp, and we took a large group of fashion and retail editors and influencers to summer camp and hosted it, but we did it in a luxury style. At this gorgeous, camper. It wasn't even a camp. It was a resort in the Catskills. But we had events. We had, tie-dyeing, which you might have done at summer camp. We just happened to do it with gorgeous cashmere sweaters. We did jewelry making with an actual jeweler that came, one of our brand partners came and taught people to make jewelry. And we did a candle making and a whole different series of things, and it was hosted and partnered with our partners. And the coverage we got was exponential, anything we invested, because of the participation of the people, to the point where I would see some of the editors and journalists at different events later on after we did all this, and they'd say, so are you going to do summer camp again next year?
Oh, I love that.
Because they felt such a connection to it, which meant their content was incredible. Because they were really appreciating the value of the experience. So it just made the content better. And in the end, we got a return on investment of our media investment of 10 to 1. So for every dollar we spent, we got 10 times the value. And it was a small campaign for us in many respects, but taking that chance and doing something completely different paid dividends. So I think the combination of those things, really understanding the customer, looking at how you can integrate and create the right strategic structure for your marketing, and then 3, taking a little risk here and there to push the boundaries, because if you just do what you did yesterday, you'll get the same result.
Absolutely.
So you've got to sometimes, if you really do want a 10, 20% increase, you're going to have to take some 10, 20% increase type risks.
That's so powerful. It really is. I love a mantra, if you will, a phrase at the branding agency where I worked for, a WPP, Super Union at the time is what it was called, Design Bridge now. But we said, every iconic brand breaks convention, commands attention, and inspires change. You've embodied all 3 of those things in the story that you just shared. So thank you for that. I'd love to switch gears as we wind down with the last question that is really tapping into your present moment. And as a consultant and advisor for brands, what are some of the common challenges you're seeing right now? And how are you advising these brands to overcome those hurdles?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because it almost, sometimes I feel like it changes daily depending on who I'm talking to.
Yes.
And I think there's the obvious one, which is the complexity of channel application and fragmentation, and the debate that goes on within them around, connected TV and streaming and advertising. Like, 3 years ago, we didn't have an ad platform on Netflix. It was this black box where all our customers were, and we couldn't get to them. And now we can. So things like that are continually changing. There's continual debate around brand safety, and, made for web environments where we can't literally capture the efficiency and effectiveness of the customer and the data. So I think there's all of the channel challenges, and working through them and optimizing is a constant challenge for any sort of leader in marketing. The other thing I think is really interesting, and I don't know that it's sort of universal because it's so complex, which is the low cost of entry into categories and competition. If you just think about something like the sneaker market today, the number of small little brands, just get on Instagram and start looking at sneakers and you'll see them all coming through. These little brands that you've never heard of, now able to make and manufacture products, or at least buy products that are manufactured and distribute them. And so the distribution channels are fragmented the same way as people's manufacturing ability has gone up. You're going to get competition from everywhere because that cost of entry is really low, particularly from a marketing perspective. You can build a channel, you can build a shop, you can build an e-commerce platform now for very, very little money. And so direct to consumer is continually going to expand. But with that is the phenomenon of the creator economy in the same way, which is everyone's a brand. Everyone has access to channels that can distribute their content as we are, and leverage that for monetary value, which creates A, clutter, B, fragmentation of distribution, C, competition, which will continually grow. So I think that's a big challenge for us to always work out how to harness and manage and what to leave behind, what to not worry about. So we have focus. The third's probably understanding the customer, which to me is perpetual. And I don't mean just understanding it's like having a great profile or having great segmentation. It's about understanding the relationship between your brand and the customer and then the value that delivers. So making sure you have a strategy to define what you're expecting from your customer base, what you need to grow, and have specific strategies to deliver against that. If you don't have that, you're shooting in the dark. Just knowing what your customer likes or cares about is only half the equation. You got to know where they're coming from and how much it's going to cost to get them and how much value you're going to get from them when you get them. How to keep them. The fourth one's talent and leadership, because none of us can do any of this alone. And engaging with the right talent externally, having great partners and being able to really understand how to select the great partners. A lot of marketing works with partner agencies like door number 3. And I think it's up to marketers and leaders today to get really, really good at actually choosing the right people to partner with and then working that partnership like they are truly part of your organization so that they know as much as you do. They're truly informed, and make sure that they have the freedom to challenge status quo and to push the boundaries and be able to do that. Working in agencies, I used to have a great relationship with the CEO at Virgin Airlines years ago, where there were a couple of events every year where he would sign off on them, which gave us the freedom to do what we felt as an agency, really pushed the boundary and drew attention like never before, hands off, no risks type thing. And that gave us the freedom as a partner to express our creativity, but also to challenge them to go further than what they normally would. And it required that investment from the CEO, and he always had funding for it. So it was never, that's a great idea, but we can't afford it right now. It was, that's a great idea, let's do it. Having that trust and creating models for that creativity and freedom with your partners, I think, is key. And then be a great leader for the organization, not just your team, but the entire team. And I always judge leaders in my teams, and as I'm coaching them, to think about the impact of growth that they have, not just on their people that they report to them, but to their wider community. Are you helping the people in merchandising get better if you're in marketing? Are you helping the e-commerce team that you work with get better when you're in marketing? If you're not doing that, you're not helping the organization and you're not a leader. You're a manager. And I think there's a big difference, because management is about engaging with the people that report to you. Leadership is about having growth influence across the entire ecosystem of the people you engage with. And I think that's key, because if you can get everyone connected and help everyone grow from your perspective and your skill set, you can have a much better organization, because one team, one person can't take an entire organization to a new level. So you got to do it together.
What a perfect note to end on. Daz, thank you so much for this rich perspective. It is just infusing into us and our audience a seasoned view on how so many of these big pieces need to fit together to ultimately grow a business. Shifting from accidental growth, you can only get so far, with some of that organic, natural growth, kind of throw spaghetti against the wall, see what sticks. But shifting to that intentional growth and building out a plan requires these perspectives that you've given us today. So thank you. Thanks for being back. And it's just great to have you.
You're welcome. It's always fantastic to catch up.